of us know that, the mainstream community has full employment, but it seems like the black community always has double the unemployment rate of everyone else. We want an end to the robbery by capitalists in our communities. We want decent housing fit for human beings. We want education for our people that exposes the true nature of this country and also educates and teaches on our true component and contribution to not just American history, but world history. We want all black men to be exempt from military service. We want the immediate end to police brutality and the murder of black people. We want freedom for all black men held in federal, state, and county jails and prisons. We want all black people who are put on trial to be tried by a true jury of their peers. And point 10 is kind of a summary of all of them. We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace for our community. So that is the 10-point program that they put together, I think, Jimmy, in a matter of really a couple of days.
Well, Tom, that's asking quite a bit. So I guess there's one thing to sort of put a plan together and to ask for the things that you think you need and want. But the other point I would say is an exercise in futility if this is never going to come to be. There's no way in the world America at that time and even today would go along with such a thing, and so the plan wasn't achievable.
Well, Jimmy, you bring up a very good point, but the reality of it is they weren't depending on the American government to do all of these things for them. Because one thing that when you study the Black Panther Party that you come to realize is that, one, there are certain things that they knew only the government would do or
Right.
could do, have the capacity to do, but there were a lot of other things that they as a grassroots organization were prepared to do. First, even though you have 10 points on this program, the first point was number 7, which was ending police brutality. So what they did is they started police patrols in their community. Now, they were in Oakland, by the way. And so what they did is, in most black communities, especially poor black communities in America, unfortunately, and we find this even today, the police don't seem to be there to protect the communities. They really seem to be there to enforce their will on the community. And so what they did is they started patrolling the police because of what they were doing to our communities. And so even though they weren't planning to do all of these things, this was really their ultimate program and their goal.
Well, the goals were certainly. I think their heart was in the right place. Let's put it that way. And certainly we're going to talk about some of the other things they did outside of the program, like their food program. They're feeding the children. I believe at their peak, they were feeding about 20,000 children, providing breakfast for them and maybe even lunch. Because I believe part of their position was that you can't go to school and perform well if you're hungry on an empty stomach. So
very true.
So they try to do something about that. But also, I didn't realize this till recently. They actually had some Black Panther schools. They actually started some schools. So it wasn't just the meals program and some of the other things they were doing. They actually had some schools that were federally funded. In fact, Huey got into a little trouble. I think one of the charges against him, he was accused of embezzling money away from the school. Initially $600,000, but I guess that case couldn't get proven. I'm not sure how it couldn't get proven. $600,000 is a lot of money. But I think he did eventually plead guilty to writing a check for $15,000 to use for personal use.
Yeah, well, that's much later on in the program when things were starting to go sideways. But Jimmy, even today, let's try to figure out a couple of groups that are giving free breakfast programs to children at that capacity, even today. And we're not talking about somebody who's funded by the government,
right,
federal or local, but these are for contributions from people and organizations that were completely community-based. And they were feeding, thousands and thousands of children
kids,
every week.
Well, see, Tom, that's the problem. I know this is going to be for another conversation, but that's the problem I have with the big mega churches. You collect all this money, what do you do with it? Where is that type of outreach to feed the hungry and provide assistance to the poor and certainly those who are most vulnerable in our neighborhoods and communities? It seems like everybody's just trying to stuff their pocket with as much as they can get, and leave you to believe that your blessing is going to come after you die, while they're getting their blessing here on earth. But yeah, the Black Panther Party attempted to do something about it. A very small organization, even though they grew to a lot of chapters around America and even international. They had a few chapters in Africa. But they were trying to do the right thing, and I would like to think that was probably because of the influence of the large number of women that were in the Black Panther Party. I think a lot of people don't realize, but the majority of the membership were actually women, not men.
Right. Initially it was a male-driven organization, but over a period of years, going from the late 60s until the early 70s, up to, I think, about 2/3 of the organization were female. And, the reality of it is, part of it is because obviously women get work done. But the other part of it is that with the federal and the local government targeting and imprisoning most of the formal leadership of the organization, primarily men, I mean, you had a lot of folks who were either imprisoned or who were killed, and women stepped up and filled in the gaps in the organization. But more so than that, whether we're looking at our households, our churches, or our community organizations, I don't think there's any secret that you're not going to be able to get very much done in terms of organization in detail unless you have a very strong community of women who are supporting your organization. And that is exactly what the Black Panther Party was doing.
Well, Tom, I think I may get into a little trouble by what I'm getting ready to say. But but I think it needs to be said that black women were probably more in their right mind back then than they are today when it comes to being in a supportive role and being down with the cause. I'm not sure if the black man and black woman today could pull off such a undertaking without there being some division over control and who's running things. So like I said, I may get into a little trouble with that statement, but it just seems like the women back then were, if the black men had a good program, had some direction, had something they believed in, a dream. And this is a good message even for today's black men, that if you have a goal in life, you have something that you're wanting to achieve, I think good women can get behind you and support you in that undertaking. But if you're not providing proper leadership and strength of character, and if you're weak-minded, then I can certainly see women of today not wanting to involve themselves with nor follow a man or any men who don't exercise proper leadership and strength of character. Black men back then, to march the streets, to patrol the police the way they were doing and be defiant, Tom, I wouldn't see that being accomplished today. You may find some radical nuts who may be willing to just walk around with a gun or something, but it just seemed like they were a little more disciplined in their approach. It wasn't just a gang of people unorganized. They were trying to be organized in their approach and be very disciplined in what they were doing, and they were. And they started off with some lofty goals. Now, whether they ended there or not is another question, but at least they started with the right intention.
I would agree. And, one of the things you have to understand is as the Black Panther Party evolved, you had men initially who created the organization, but as women began to join the organization, they took on some pretty prominent roles.
Yes, they did.
One, because of the volume of women in the absence of men, whether that's due to incarceration or outright assassination or other needs. But I think practically all of the editors of the Black Panther newspaper were women. And you understand how important having a mass distribution of news or other print is important to the lifeblood of any organization. After Huey Newton ended up going into exile, he appointed a woman, Elaine Brown, as really the leader of the organization after he left. And so she was there for a couple of years. And that's not to say that there weren't any issues with women leading the organization and men being either one threatened by that or not being ready to lead and co-lead with women. But there were other women who weren't just standing behind the men, as was initially the platform of the organization, but were side by side with the men in the cause and the struggle for the liberation of the Black community.
Now, I'm going to tell you, I have seen 2 videos of Elaine speaking. And once again, I may get in trouble for this, but she was a little bit of a looker, Tom. So she was a strong sister, but she was a strong, good-looking sister on top of that. So not to take away from her strength of character, but I just wanted to point that out, give sister a compliment.
Yeah, you know what? You're probably, she was a very attractive young lady, and at that time, you have to remember, these folks were in their early 20s.
Yeah.
And again, Jim, we've talked about this before, but when we look at the 21st century and who's leading our organization, and we look at some of the organizations being led by the younger generation, but the majority of the vanguard of freedom and revolution in the 20th century were being created and ran by young people in their late teens, their early 20s. Whether you're talking about the Black Panther Party, whether you're talking about SNCC, whether you're talking about the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I mean, you talk about folks like Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. You have to remember, these cats were in their early 20s when they started doing this stuff, when they started taking the heat from the public, when they started taking the heat from the government. We think of these folks as old cats, but when these folks were in the forefront of what they were doing, they were very young, late teens and early 20s.
Well, Tom, that speaks to the urgency to bring about change for our people. So they took personal responsibility. So were they their brother's keepers? Yes. So they accepted personal responsibility to help bring about and manifest a change that we benefit from today. And it's sad when you compare that our young people today are more involved in video games and nonsense, have no sense of urgency about bringing about any kind of change for the future, especially if that change doesn't involve benefiting them in some way. When you start saying that I'm going to have to lay down my life, put my skin and blood on the line for 2 or 3 generations of Black people in the future, that's a tough sell today. But back then it wasn't as tough of a sell because our people were doing it. They had a sense of purpose that they really want to bring about change and make things better.
I would agree, and I think you bring up a very good point when you bring the point of distractions. And distractions in the way of video games, distractions in the way of television. You could probably honestly say distractions in terms of what's on the radio. All of that is programming the subconscious mind of our young people and older people for that matter. But when you compare what we're living with and through today to what we had in the 1960s or 1970s, because yes, they did have radio, they did have television, the programming was a lot different. But when you consider the breakdown of the consciousness of young Black people with the distractions and the entertainment that they have today compared to then, it is almost surprising that they aren't more wayward than they are today, because there are a lot of distractions that young people have to deal with today that just weren't there, but the distractions were different. I would agree with you. The sense of purpose was different, and you have to understand that our communities were pretty much encapsulated in of themselves, because on the most part, we are still segregated or separated today, but it was de facto back then.
Right.
So they had a very clear or clearer sense of purpose in terms of what they needed to do and why, because it was right there in front of them.
So I also read, Tom, that it was estimated that the FBI wrote anywhere from 60 to 75% of the articles written about the Black Panther Party back then as part of their propaganda strategy. And with the government coming at you with all of their strength in that fashion, it's amazing that they were still able to maintain themselves and be considered heroes in the Oakland community and other communities that they served and patrolled. When that much negative press is coming out against you, I mean, J. Edgar Hoover had nothing positive to say about the Black Panther Party, and when 75% of the articles in the press were written by the FBI against you, I mean, that is saying a lot.
I would agree with you, Jimmy, and it is a shameful legacy in American history when you consider a group of people and a group of young people who, one, began or created an organization primarily due to the suffrage, the oppression, the exploitation, and every other kind of Asian that was going on within our communities, and that the government in and of itself, in its desire to keep the status quo, had a completely well-funded program to completely infiltrate,
yes,
exploit, and destroy any organization, because it wasn't just the Black Panther Party they were targeting. They were targeting the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Go figure. Of course, they were targeting the Nation of Islam. They were infiltrating and trying to exploit SNCC. But the Black Panther Party was different than a lot of these organizations because, number one, similar to the Nation of Islam, they were prepared to protect and defend themselves, and being armed in doing so, because they were expressing their right as Americans based upon the Constitution to protect and defend their communities.
Well, Tom, in addition to attacking these organizations, like you said, they got in the organization. They became part of the organization. The best way to destroy something is destroy it from within, not from without.
Right.
And so many black FBI agents at that time owe their careers to these organizations, because without them, there's a good chance they may have never been hired by the FBI at that time, especially in the 60s, 50s, 40s. And we know that making your way, infiltrating black organizations started far back as Marcus Garvey. We talked about that in one of the previous shows, how the very first black FBI agent was hired to spy on Marcus and his organization. So a lot of black FBI agents actually owe their career to these organizations, because they probably wouldn't have gotten hired if not for the FBI wanting to see what was going on, and not just spying. I can almost tolerate the government spying on an organization, but when you involve yourself in their collapse, when you willfully and purposely, create disarray and problems and confusion and struggle within in order to stress these organizations out and destroy them, when you know that they're not doing anything harmful. I mean, at that time, none of these organizations were killing people. They weren't hunting anybody down. They were not a serial killing organization. They were not frauding the public. So the harm of speaking up and advocating for your rights surely cannot be a crime. It shouldn't be a death sentence in America.
Jimmy, you bring up a very good point, but there's an old saying that started in the probably the late 1800s, early 1900s, that unfortunately folks who were not black felt that there were no rights that black folks owned that they had a obligation to withhold. And so unfortunately, you did have a lot of folks who were probably underpaid sellouts to black organizations who were really only focused on achieving freedom, liberty, and justice for our folks, because their ancestors built the country, and so they felt they had a right to live and enjoy the same constitutional rights that everyone else did in the country.
Well, Tom, not only did we have that right, but America is better for it far as fighting for that right. Um, I've always contended that, that the legacy of black people should be that we've been the most American of the Americans. That, when America was not living up to her tenets of all men are created equal, someone had to show America that she was not living up to her words, and that was black people, for the most part, who put their lives on the line, who put their blood, skin in the game to do that. So without that, there's no telling how much of a lack of progress America would have made if not for the civil rights movement and those people willing to fight for the right to be an American. If you're going to be in this country and not be exiled, not be deported, if America's going to say, okay, that you are now a citizen by birthright, then America needs to honor that. That needs to mean something other than lip service. You can't have me in America and treat me like a third-class citizen when I've done everything when called upon. I've fought in every war. I've been patriotic. I've paid taxes. I've worked and struggled to help build America during her best times and during her worst times. So black folks have certainly earned the right to be at the table. So it saddens me that we have not recognized that we're not guests in this country. And we shouldn't allow anyone to treat us and make us feel as though we are guests in this country. And that we're not just as American as the next person whose family only been here 1 or 2 generations, when our legacy and our lineage traced back all the way to 1619, when the first Africans were brought to this country.
You're right, Jimmy. And I guess the issue that we're dealing with is that if you don't have any leverage, politically, economically, militarily, the group who is in power isn't going to give you your rights because you asked for it or because it's the right thing to do. There isn't anything that the Europeans achieved in this country that they didn't do without the bullet or without the Bible. And so ultimately, we have to understand that with 500 years of history in this country, unfortunately, there isn't anything that we've achieved in this country that we haven't gotten by dying. Not fighting, not asking, not appealing for the reason of righteousness, but dying. And that literally means our right to freedom, not being enslaved, our right to vote, our right to literally every liberty that every other group has received just getting here. We or our ancestors have had to die and bleed in order to get it.
Well, that is true, Tom. I think we had a caller to our show. I'm not sure if they hung up or we'll see if they call back. If you just called in to the show, please call back. We'll give this another try. So, Tom.
We have a few more minutes. So
we got a few more minutes. So you better hurry if you're trying to call in. And like I said, Tom, the other thing is that we should not be made to feel as though we don't belong here. We've paid more of a price to be here than any other group of people, especially those who benefit today from where America is. That benefit may not have been here if it had not been for the civil rights struggle and those who came before us. So, with that being said, I would like to say that I hope that we can take this and understand that we have a right to be successful in America. We have a right to claim that success without apology. And you shouldn't feel bad for wanting to better yourself and better your people. So with that, get off your knees. The time of begging people for freedom, begging people for a chance and opportunity and asking is gone. Now is the time for us to come together and do, whether you agree with the Black Panther Party or not, and when some of the things they did, but they did organize, they did have a plan, they did come together, they did achieve some things. More so then, which is a much tougher environment to achieve in than today. The fact that we can't do very much in America today with all the resources that we have and opportunity is sad, Tom. It's a disgrace to all those who came before us and the struggles and the sacrifice they have made.
I would agree.
So as we wind down, we have about 2.5 more minutes. I was hoping the caller would call back if possible. If you are interested in joining the show, the number is here on the screen, 972-497-2280. The lines open up at 9 o'clock Central Standard Time, and they close at 9:30 sharp. So if you call at 9:31, the show will be over and you won't get through. Well, the show may not be over. Sometimes we go a few minutes extra time, but the dial-in lines will be closed at that point. So any last words, Tom, as we get ready to close the show out?
Well, Jimmy, I appreciate you bringing up the points in terms of us not asking, not demanding, but taking what is ours in this country.
Yeah, we're right. You've earned it.
An old African saying
nobody's giving you
the lion shall never receive his glory as long as the hunter is writing the narrative.
Yeah,
We've got to write our own narrative.
That is true.
And at the end of the day, we understand that we have to pay the ultimate price in order to earn what is ours. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, because we understand that we have to work twice as hard to get it scratched and 3 times as hard to get ahead. But if that's what you have to do,
well, Tom, I'm always amazed that when you start having these conversations, especially around mixed environments, and you're talking to black people about coming together and doing something for your people, there always seems to be some trepidation, that we shouldn't be having these conversations around white people. Well, why not? If you can't have it around white people, red people, yellow people, who can you have it around? And we don't have to be ashamed to speak up for ourselves. Once again, I'm not asking America to give us anything, but I certainly don't want America to get in our way and block our progress if we're trying to do for ourselves. Other people come to America and do for themselves without apology. So there's nothing wrong with black people coming together and doing for themselves without apology. The time of being ashamed of success is over with. The time for us to come together and get off our knees. We've been on our knees so long we don't even realize that we're on our knees. We think we're standing up to something, but we're really not. So I'm not asking anymore. I'm not begging. I'm not pleading. I don't care whether you agree with me or not. I don't care if you like what I'm doing or not. The reality is that I would like to see more progress being made by black people that's internally grown from like a groundswell, so we can be proud of what we've done without someone coming along to rescue us and saying that they're proud of how they had to reach out and save these group of black people. Go ahead, Tom.
I think you bring up a very good point. And, politically speaking, we've talked about this, that Africans in America, black people we call them, have always been unified when it comes to certain areas. For instance, voting. The 90 to 95% of African Americans vote Democrat. But we have to understand that before we voted 90 to 95% Democrat, we voted 90 to 95% Republican. And so at the end of the day, there are certain areas that we can leverage to achieve what we will, but we have to have the collective discipline to achieve that. I was listening to a video podcast. Bob Johnson, the former owner of BET, said, you shouldn't have permanent friends or permanent enemies, just permanent interests.
Oh,
and that's what we have to focus on.
I like that. Okay, so we are out of time. I want to thank those who watch our show. Please subscribe to our channel and help spread the word to others. We're here every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Central Time. And if there is a person or a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave a comment. We are open. If we don't get any suggestions, we do have our list for the next, a year and a half, 2 years that we can draw on, Tom. So,
yep. Oh, yeah. Jimmy, last thing.
Yes.
Book.
Yes, the books are listed here. So, Tom, you can't see it. You'll be able to see it afterwards. So, all of the people that we've discussed, from Madam C.J. Walker, Marcus Garvey, Jesse Owens, Jesse Lowry, Thurgood Marshall, Shirley Chisholm, Dr. Drew, Hank Aaron, and now the Black Panther Party. Now, some of you may be impressed with my memory, although it used to be a great, but I have all the pictures here on the screen, so that's how I'm able to just go through the list. But also the list of books are here also, that we have the Miseducation of the Negro, Their Eyes Are Watching God, Malcolm X, Uncle Tom's Children, and then Oxford Tales is the one I just recently added. So I am waiting for your selection, Tom, to add to the list.
Well, my selection for this week is From the Browder File by Anthony T. Browder. That's my selection for this.
What's the name of the book?
For this show. From the Browder File. Browder. From the Browder File by Anthony T. Browder.
I haven't heard of that.
My prior books were Miseducation of the Negro, Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett, and Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleveland.
I'm gonna have to go out and get that one and read it. So okay, we will add that.
It's a short book, easy read. It's a collection of essays.
The collection of essays. Okay. Well, I'm going to add that to the to our book list. So, so with that being said, Tom, we're going to say good night to everyone and thank you so much. Well, we do this for you, and without your support and patronage, we would have no motivation to do it. So, let's bring about the change that we want. And Tom, I'm going to give you the absolute last word. Go ahead.
Don't wait for change. Create it. Good evening, everyone.
All right. Thank you guys so much.